Welcome to the Knowledge Seeker channel. The channel is dedicated to exploring critical issues in the world. As such, this channel is not afraid to challenge existing facts, beliefs, and practices in order to contribute to the advancement of knowledge. This presentation is titled Fulanis of Nigeria. You are biting dangerously more than you can chew. Nigeria is too big and complex. This is the map of Nigeria showing some of the ethnic groups in the country. Actually, there are about 300 to 400 ethnic groups in Nigeria. In fact, some Nigerians even say that the number of ethnic groups even go beyond 400. So there are hundreds of ethnic groups in Nigeria. And the Fulani ethnic group is one of the groups that make up the 300 to 400 ethnic groups in the country. The purpose of this presentation is to achieve three goals. One, to suggest to the Fulanis that Nigeria is too big and complex for them to assume that they can own it by Fulanizing and Islamizing it. Two, let them know that their dream of Fulanizing and Islamizing Nigeria, as suggested by Sir Ahmadu Bello and other firebrand political, religious, and military elites of the Islamic North, will not come to pass. And three, to avoid overstretching their political and military reach, thereby exposing themselves to retaliatory attacks from other ethnic groups. That is the Fulanis, should stop their violent actions and integrate themselves with other Nigerian groups to develop the country. In order to achieve the goals of the presentation, the following arguments are made. One, the Fulani desire to Fulanize and Islamize Nigeria shall not come to pass because Nigeria is too big and complex for one ethnic group to attempt to dominate it. Two, it is suicidal for members of the Fulani ethnicity in Nigeria to attempt to implement the dream of Sir Ahmadu Bello and other firebrand Fulani religious, political, and military leaders by using jihad to Islamize Nigeria in a country made of 300 to 400 ethnic groups and a population of more than 230 million people. 3. It is preferable for the Fulanis to be part of Nigeria rather than try to own and dominate a very complex country with more than 300 ethnic groups. 4. The jihadist part will consume the Fulanis because when other ethnic groups mobilize their youths, hunters, and fighters, the Fulani jihadists will not have any chance. 5. When members of other ethnic groups are aroused to action to counterattack Fulani herders, kidnappers, bandits, and jihadists, even the Nigerian military will not be able to hold them back. 6. The Fulanis need to analyze the situation in Central African Republic, Rwanda, and Syria to see what is likely to happen when more than 300 ethnic groups rise up militarily against the Fulani and their associates who think that they can force people to convert to their religion by force in the 21st century. Now, let's look at the Fulani claim to own Nigeria. It is inferable that a substantial number of Fulanis in Nigeria tend to believe that they own Nigeria. They do so strongly, believing that the British government handed over Nigeria to the leadership of the Islamic North when it granted independence to Nigeria. As a result, they further believed that Nigeria should be administered through the strategic interests of the Islamic North, dominated by the Fulanis. Since Nigeria was given to them, the country should be Islamized and operated through the Sharia. To show ownership, Fulani leaders have variously made provocative statements to claim that the country has as their property, disregarding the fact that the country has 300 to 400 ethnic indigenous groups. For instance, former Sultan Ibrahim Dasuki of the Sokoto caliphate stated, and I quote, "This country was given to we Northerners by the British to rule. When they left, the understanding between us was that the North would always lead and rule Nigeria." And I unquote. This is the picture of Sultan Ibrahim Dasuki. He is the one who believed that the British handed over Nigeria to his people. Of course, he's one of the Fulani leaders who believe in that fantasy. When Sultan Dasuki stated, "we Northerners," he meant the Fulani, since they dominate the Islamic North. How? 1. The Sultan of Sokoto Caliphate is always chosen from among the Fulanis. No Hausa, Emir, Kanuri, Shiwa Arab, Junkun, Baji, or Yoruba Muslim has ever been nominated or selected as a sultan, even though they are Muslims like the Fulanis. 2. No Hausa, Igbira, Kanuri, Shuwa Arab, Junkun, Yoruba Muslim has ever been appointed as an emir. 3. Almost all the Hausa former city-states have Fulani emirs, which means that when the Fulanis talk about Islamization, they are actually talking about Fulanization. They want to control the country, but they are using Islam as a cover. Because if Islam is the case, then how is it that an Hausa man cannot be a sultan? An Hausa man cannot be an emir? A Yoruba man cannot be an emir if they are all Muslims? 4. Most of the governors in the Islamic North are Fulanis, even though the Hausas have the largest population. Therefore, it is necessary to make it clear that the Islamic agenda is driven by the Fulanis, since they believe they own Nigeria. In other words, Islam is being exploited for the purpose of achieving the Fulani control of the country. Otherwise, other Muslims in Nigeria would have been allowed to serve as emirs. It is a fact that Fulani Muslims discriminate against other Muslims in Nigeria. Now, let's look at the provocation of other ethnic groups by the Fulanis in Nigeria. In other words, the Fulanis have been pushing the buttons of other ethnic groups. Some Fulani political, religious, and military elites tend to make provocative statements that offend other ethnic nationalities in the country. In other words, in a country made of 300 to 400 or more ethnic groups, the members of one ethnic group have a tendency to make statements that imply that other ethnic groups are colonial subjects of the Fulani. For instance, it was a highly revered Sir Ahmadu Bello who made, without thinking about the consequences of his utterance, when he declared, and I quote, "We, the people of the North, will continue our stated intention to conquer the South and to dip the Quran in the Atlantic Ocean after the British leave our shores." And I unquote. Thus, even though Sir Ahmadu Bello knew that Nigeria is made up of 300 to 400 ethnic groups, he declared that those other ethnic groups must be conquered by the Fulani. He expected the other ethnic groups to fold their arms and wait to be conquered. It is indeed a suicidal dream that can backfire against the interests of the Fulanis if they are not careful in provoking other ethnic groups in Nigeria. Without paying attention to the feelings of the 300 to 400 ethnic nationalities, he reminded his people about the need to conquer other ethnic groups in Nigeria by saying in 1961, and I quote, "The new nation called Nigeria should be an estate of our great-grandfather, Othman Dan Fodio. We must ruthlessly prevent a change of power. We must use the minorities in the North as willing tools and the South as a conquered territory, and never allow them to rule over us, and never allow them to have control over their future." And I unquote. Thus, Sir Ahmadu Bello literally declared war against other nationalities in the country. This is the picture of Sir Ahmadu Bello, the former premier of northern Nigeria, who made that declarative statement to the Fulanis of Nigeria do not care about the feelings of other Nigerian Muslims, even though they always talk about fighting for Islam. They actually care more about fighting for the Fulanis. Now, to show that the Fulanis do not care about other Muslims in the North, apart from themselves, when President Goodluck Jonathan wanted to contest the 2011 presidential election, another fiery Fulani leader, Alhaji Aliyu Gwazo in the North, declared without mincing words, and I quote, "No Goodluck or anyone else will stop us from taking back our power next year. We will kill, maim, destroy, and turn this country into Africa's biggest war zone and refugee camp if they try it." When I say that the presidency must come to the North next year, I am referring to the Hausa Fulani core North, and not any northern Christian or Muslim minority tribe. The Christians in the North, such as the Berom, the Tiv, the Katav, the Jaba, the Zuru, the Sayawa, the Junku, the Doma, and all others are nothing, and the Muslim minorities in the North, including the Kanuri, the Nupe, the Gbera, the Babo, the Shua Arabs, the Mago, and all the others know that when we are talking about the leadership in the North and Nigeria, Allah has given it to us, the Hausa Fulani. Alhaji Wazo made it clear here that the Islamic North is euphemism for Fulanization. Hence, he said that the Kanuri, Nupe, Igbira, Babo, Shua Arab, Mago, and other Muslims are not equal to the Fulanis. Thus, they are subject to be annihilated for the superior Fulanis to take over, it is not surprising that the Hausas are bearing the brunt of the violence perpetrated by Fulani herdsmen, bandits, kidnappers, and jihadists today. This is the picture of Alhaji Aliyu Gwazo, who made that fiery speech about the other Muslims in Nigeria. Now, let's look at most Fulanis in Nigeria regard the jihadists as freedom fighters and excuse their atrocities. In other words, while Fulani herdsmen and jihadists, kidnappers and bandits have been killing Nigerians for almost 10 years now, the Fulanis tend to regard these killers as freedom fighters. To understand why many Islamic leaders in the north regard Boko Haram, Islamic State of West Africa province, violent herdsmen, bandits, and kidnappers as freedom fighters, it is necessary to pay attention to what Sir Ahmadu Bello said. Again, I repeat what Sir Ahmadu Bello, a Fulani leader of northern Nigeria, said. So please listen to me. Listen to what he said. When he said, and I quote, "We must use the minorities in the north as a willing tools and the south as a conquered territory and never allow them to rule over us," and I unquote. He was suggesting the formation of Islamic warriors who will fight to conquer the rest of Nigeria because he has no respect for them. Therefore, the violent herdsmen, bandits, kidnappers, Boko Haram, ISWAP, Ansaru, Mahmuda group are basically the foot soldiers necessary to fight and conquer other ethnic groups in Nigeria to establish an Islamic state, which is to be dominated by the Fulanis. This is why most Islamic leaders in the Islamic North, that is the Fulanis, regard the terrorists as freedom fighters that are fighting to Islamize Nigeria. Hence, Major General Buhari, retired, opposed President Goodluck Jonathan when he launched attacks to deplete the Boko Haram in 2014 and early 2015. When Buhari realized that President Jonathan was decimating the Boko Haram, he rejected the military effort by saying, and I quote, "The federal government stopped clampdown of Boko Haram insurgents, saying Niger Delta militants were never killed or properties belonging to them destroyed," and I unquote. So Major General Buhari was defending Boko Haram terrorism. Then he added, and I quote, "Attack on Boko Haram was an attack on the North." That meant that the entire leadership of the Islamic North supports Boko Haram. Then Professor Usman Yusuf added recently, and I quote, "These bandits are themselves freedom fighters." I repeat, and I quote, "These bandits are themselves freedom fighters," and I unquote. So here you have a Fulani intellectual supporting the terrorism being perpetrated by Fulani bandits by saying that they are freedom fighters. Thus, he suggested that the government should negotiate with them instead of trying to militarily attack them to stop killing Nigerians. Thus, it is a fair game to kill other Nigerians and not the Fulani. Now, let's see why the Fulanis are biting more than they can chew in Nigeria. It is necessary to show that the Fulanis of Nigeria are biting more than they can chew when they say that they own Nigeria and want to Islamize it under their leadership. Such a view is offensive and provocative to indigenous ethnic groups that have existed in their territories for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Follow me as I identify the reasons why the Fulanis are biting more than they can chew in Nigeria. 1. Britain did not hand over Nigeria to any ethnic group, even though Fulanis tend to claim that. And there are instances to show that that did not happen. A. It is a fantastic tale to believe that British authorities handed over Nigeria to the Islamic North, led by the Fulanis. Why? British colonization of the area, now known as Nigeria, was a war of aggression, therefore illegal under international law. B. To assume that Britain handed over a political scheme that it created through a war of aggression means that the Fulanis of Nigeria want to continue the war of aggression against other ethnic groups. C. Since a war of aggression is a violation of international law, this means that other ethnic groups have a legal right to wage a defensive war to stop Fulani aggression. So the Fulanis have to be careful. 2. The 300 or more ethnic nationalities existed hundreds, if not thousands of years before the British colonized the area. And there are many ways to look at this. A. How can Britain own a territory in which various ethnic groups have lived and existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years? B. The fact that most of the 300 or more ethnic groups have existed in their territorial spaces for hundreds or thousands of years automatically nullify the argument that Britain owned Nigeria. See, if Britain cannot lay claim to the territorial ownership of land, how can the Islamic North, especially the Fulanis, claim that they own Nigeria? D. Do they expect other ethnic groups to fold their arms and allow themselves to be conquered and colonized? 3. Nigeria has a population of over 230 million people, and there are many instances to show the complexity. A. Apart from the fact that Nigeria has 300 or more ethnic groups, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. In fact, Nigeria is the 6th most populous country in the world, coming after Indonesia and Pakistan. B. It is impossible and almost suicidal for one ethnic group to claim that it owns a country with 300 or more ethnic groups with a population that is more than 230 million people. C. It is madness for one ethnic group, that is the Fulanis, to assume that it can wage a jihad to subdue more than 300 ethnic groups. 4. Nigeria contains 3 of the most populous ethnic groups in Africa. And there are many ways to look at it. A. Unlike any other country in the continent, Nigeria contains Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba these three ethnic groups have more people than the population of many countries, not only in Africa, but throughout the world. B, even if the Fulanis mobilize all their members to come to Nigeria, it is a Herculean task to assume that they will be able to conquer these large ethnic groups and Islamize them in the 21st century. Indeed, it is a suicidal to even think about it. See, in addition, when hundreds of smaller ethnic groups join with the three largest ethnic groups, Fulani fighters will crumble in no time. 5. Almost all Nigerian ethnic groups have effective warrior traditions. A, even though the other Nigerian ethnic groups have not responded in kind to the violence that Fulani herdsmen, bandits, kidnappers, Lakurawa, Ansaru, Mahmuda Group, and Boko Haram have inflicted on Nigerians, it should be noted that all the ethnic nationalities have highly institutionalized warrior traditions. Consequently, if the other ethnic groups decide to pay back in kind, the situation could be worse than Rwanda and Central African Republic. B. Therefore, it is necessary for the Fulanis in Nigeria to be careful because their violent actions can instigate a firestorm that even the Nigerian police and the Nigerian military will not be able to control. 6. It is fallacious to compare Nigeria with Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria in terms of conducting a jihad. Many Fulanists and Islamists in Nigeria dream of turning Nigeria into Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, where Islamic jihadists prevailed in their struggles against much stronger forces. Indeed, it is fallacious to think that what happened in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria can happen in Nigeria. Why? A. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria were already majority Islamic countries, not Nigeria. B. That is, these three countries have much smaller populations compared to Nigeria. For instance, 1. Afghanistan has 44 million people in 2025. 2. Iraq has 42 million people in 2025. C. Syria has 26 million people in 2025. D. Nigeria has 237 million people in 2025. E. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria are in desert and mountainous terrain. F. Most of Nigeria is thickly forested with heavy rainfall during the rainy season. G. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria are majority Muslim countries, therefore much easier for jihadists to operate. H. Nigeria is a multi-religious country, which makes it much harder for a jihadist to operate, especially in the Middle Belt and southern Nigeria, if the ethnic groups decide to fight back. 7. Nigeria is a hostile country for jihadists to operate if the ethnic groups decide to fight back. And there are many reasons for that observation. A jihadist might operate partially successful in the north, where Hausa serves as a generic language. B. A jihadist cannot use Hausa to hide his or her identity in the south. See, therefore, Fulani herdsmen and fighters coming from other countries in the Sahel will find it difficult to hide their identity as guerrilla fighters due to the fact that more than 300 languages are spoken in Nigeria. Jihadists who cannot speak indigenous languages would easily be caught and dealt with as soon as he leaves the north. 8. Unlike the desert and open grassland, the tropical forest is an obstacle for jihad. Even fighters from ISIS and Al-Qaeda who join Nigerian jihadists will find it very difficult to operate when they realize that the forest is different from the desert and mountainous terrain they have been operating in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. It should be recalled that the forest and mountainous nature of the Middle Belt prevented Uthman Dan Fodio's Islamic Revolution from spreading southwards in the 19th century. In other words, the thieves, Idoma, and the other ethnic groups fought them and stopped them from spreading down. Thus, if the indigenous ethnic groups go on a war path, the jihadists would easily be overwhelmed militarily. 9. The Fulani establishing of camps in the forest as a strategy to mobilize for jihad is suicidal. So far, Fulani herdsmen, bandits, kidnappers, and jihadists have tactically spread around Nigeria and established bush camps in the forest to prepare to launch full-scale attack when mobilization has been completed. However, those hiding in the forest could easily be overwhelmed if those who own the forest decide to seal off the entry and exit points to prevent those in the forest from getting supplies. In other words, if the ethnic groups decide to act forcefully, they will send their fighters to seal off the entry and exit points, and the herdsmen in the forest will face hunger when supplies are blocked from reaching them. Therefore, it is simplistic for those who think that they can overwhelm the country by establishing camps in the forest. For instance, if horsemen establish a secret camp in the forest in Delta or Imo State, if Delta or Imo fighters seal off the entry and exit points, the herdsmen will be rendered helpless and forced to surrender. This is already happening in various parts of the country. In the last 3 weeks, many Nigerian groups have been responding by forming vigilante and hunter groups to comb the forest. As a result, many Fulani herdsmen, bandits, and kidnappers have been flushed out of their hidings. In a full-scale war, the indigenous fighters and hunters would be able to neutralize herdsmen hiding in the forest. In a full-scale war, the indigenous fighters and hunters would be able to neutralize herdsmen hiding in the forest. This is why it is stated here that it is easier to fight a jihad in the mostly rainless desert terrain of the Middle East and Afghanistan than in the tropical forests of Nigeria. Imagine a Fulani fighter from Sokoto or Niger or Guinea or Senegal hiding in a forest in Yoruba land or Igbo land or Ijaw land or Benin land or Urobo land or Efik land. or a Bibio land. If the natives decide to fight back, the Fulani fighter in the forest will have no means of escaping back to Sokoto or Niger or Guinea and so forth. Moreover, a guerrilla warfare is only possible if the fighter can mingle with the civilian population. Thus, a Fulani fighter in Ijoland or Isoko land will not be able to have the cover necessary, since he probably will not be able to speak the dialect of the language in an area he is hiding. Moreover, an invading force needs a large number of fighters in order to penetrate a defensive perimeter. Thus, merely sending 50 or 100 or even more jihadists to hide in a bush in any state in the south will not be sufficient to prevent indigenous fighters from wiping them out. 10. Jihadists fighting in southern Nigeria and some parts of the Middle Belt would find it difficult to get reinforcement. And there are many reasons for this. A. It is indeed suicidal for Islamists and jihadists who think that they can Islamize Nigeria by spreading fighters around the country. Assuming that herdsmen, bandits, kidnappers, and jihadists are spread and hidden in the forest in Benue, Kogi, Edo, Ondo, Enugu, Anambra, Rivers, and Bayelsa states to carry out a massive jihad, they will not be able to reinforce their units because the reinforcement would have to come from the north to the south. So if Benue, Kogi, Edo, Ondo, Enugu, Anambra, Rivers, and Bayelsa fighters and hunters mount road patrols, it will be exceedingly difficult for the trucks that will convey the reinforcements to pass all the roads to get to their destination if the ethnic groups decide to go on a war path against the jihadists. Why will it be very difficult to reinforce jihadist fighters in southern Nigeria if a war erupts? One major reason is that most of those fighters will not look like the indigents, thereby making it easy to detect that they are strangers or foreigners. B. Most of them, even those that can speak English, will speak in an accent that is different from the indigents of various states in the South. C. Some of them will not be able to speak English at all, thereby making it easy to identify them. 11. Those seeking to Fulanize and Islamize Nigeria should remember what happened in Central African Republic. In Central African Republic, an Islamic jihadist group, the Seleka Movement, launched a violent jihad and overthrew the government, just like what the Fulanis are trying to do in Nigeria. The Seleka took over and established an Islamic agenda. It violated the rights of the ancestralists and Christians, just like what the herdsmen, bandits, kidnappers, and jihadists are doing in Nigeria today. When the ancestralists and Christians fought back, the Seleka had to flee back to their region. The fear of massive retaliation forced the UN, France, and other countries to intervene to prevent the massacre of the Muslims in Central African Republic. The Fulanis need to study the Central African Republic situation to know that they cannot overwhelm a country of over 230 million people in a war. This is a picture of Seleka fighters in Central African Republic. They invaded the country and overthrew the government, took over and tried to Islamize the country. This is the fighters, the traditionalists and Christian fighters who reacted towards the Seleka invasion. And when they hit back, there was a fear in the world that they might massacre the Muslims in the country. The same thing will happen in Nigeria. If the Fulani jihadists keep pushing, the Nigerian ethnic groups will react someday, and it's going to be like in Central African Republic. 12. They need to pay attention to the Rwandan situation. The Fulanis and the jihadists in Nigeria should also pay attention to what happened in Rwanda. In Rwanda, just like in Nigeria, the Tutsis, members of a smaller ethnic group, dominated the Hutus because they felt that the colonial power had given them the right to rule the country, just like the Fulanis argue that they have a right to rule the country of Nigeria. The Hutus, being the majority group, pleaded for equal opportunity and the right to rule to no avail. Then a plane carrying the heads of state of Rwanda and Burundi was shot down, allegedly by Tutsi fighters, since the two leaders were Hutus. In a retaliatory rampage, the Hutus massacred about 800,000 Tutsis and some Hutu collaborators. Therefore, it is necessary for the Fulanis in Nigeria to be careful. If the jihadists keep killing Nigerians, it could get to a stage where the other ethnic groups, including the Hausas, might decide to go on a retaliatory rampage against the Fulanis. If such were to take place, the Rwandan situation could be a child's play in Nigeria. Therefore, Fulanis, stop thinking that you own Nigeria and you can impose Islam on millions of Nigerians. This is a picture after the genocide in Rwanda. You see, when the Houthis decided to go on a rampage, this was what happened. So can you imagine over 300 Nigerian ethnic groups going on a rampage against the Fulanis in Nigeria? 13. The increasing anti-jihadist unrest in Syria. Many Fulanis and Islamists in Nigeria assume that they can Islamize Nigeria without facing a serious backlash. They should watch the unfolding situation in Syria. In Syria, after the coalition of jihadist forces led by Ayad Tahrir al-Sham, that is HTS, finally succeeded in overthrowing the government of Bashar al-Assad on December 8, 2024, the country is still unstable. As a result, the Sunni Arabs, the Druze, Alawite, and others are now engaged in power struggles, thereby making the country unstable. The HTS, that is the jihadist groups that formed the current regime, is finding it difficult to impose order on the other ethnic groups. So Fulanis, Nigeria is a multi-ethnic and a multi-religious country. This is a picture of massive protests in Syria. This is after the jihadists have taken over. So if the Fulanis think they can impose Sharia and Islam on Nigeria, they should think about what will happen when the other ethnic groups react, like what is happening in Syria today. 14. It is simplistic to assume that tactics used to subdue the Hausas in the 19th century will work in the 21st century. Why? Nigerians have studied the tactics that the Fulanis, led by Othman Danfodio, used to trick the Hausas and some Yorubas to join them to overthrow the Hausa city-states and take over Ilorin. Nigerians have also studied what tactics could be used under Takia and Hodna to trick the enemy to fall as easily. Such tactics will not work in Nigeria. Therefore, it is a dangerous escapade to think that one ethnic group can marshal forces to overwhelm 300 or more ethnic groups. It is indeed madness for anyone in Islamic North to think that Islam can be imposed on Nigeria. "15. The Hausas and other Muslims know that Islam is being used or exploited to Fulanize Nigeria." Yes, the Hausas know that the Fulanis are simply using Islam as a cover for Fulanization. Increasingly, the Hausas and other Islamized ethnic groups in the north, central Nigeria, and the southwest have realized that the Fulanis are only using Islam to grab power for themselves. How do they know? Because many Fulani elites have openly said that they have no regard for other Muslims in Nigeria. This is supported by the fact that other Muslims are not allowed to serve as a sultan. Likewise, they also know that only Fulanis are appointed as emirs. So, it is probable that the Hausas might join southern Nigerians to fight to liberate themselves from Fulani control in the event of a major war. Let's see a quote or a statement made by Aliyu Gwazo about the non-Fulanis in Nigeria. He said, and I quote, "They can grumble," that is referring to the non-Fulani Muslims in Nigeria. So I repeat, he said, and I quote, "They can grumble, moan, groan as much as they want, but each time they go into their bedrooms to meet their wives, and each time they get on their prayer mats to begin their prayers, it is we, the Fulani, that they think of, that they fear, that they bow to, and that they pray for. Some of them are even ready to give us their wives and daughters for one night's sport and pleasure. They owe us everything. This is because we gave them Islam through the great jihad waged by Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio. We also captured Ilorin, killed their local king, and installed our Fulani emir. We took that ancient town away from the barbarian Yoruba and their filthy pagan gods. We liberated all these places and all these people by imposing Islam on them by force. And I unquote. So this is how Alhaji Aliyu Gwazo refers to other non-Fulani Muslims in Nigeria. He basically has no respect for them whatsoever. In conclusion, the following summaries are made. 1. Indeed, the Fulani desire to Fulanize and Islamize Nigeria shall not come to pass because Nigeria is too big and complex for one ethnic group to attempt to dominate it. 2. It is suicidal to attempt to implement the dream of Sir Ahmadu Bello and other firebrand Fulani religious, political, and military elites in a country made of 300 to 400 ethnic groups and a population which is more than 230 million people. 3. Fulanis be part of Nigeria rather than try to own and dominate a very complex country with more than 300 ethnic groups and a population of more than 230 million people. 4. The jihadist path will end up consuming you, the Fulanis, because when other ethnic groups mobilize their youths, hunters, and fighters, your jihadists will not have a chance to prevail. 5. When members of other ethnic groups are aroused to action to counterattack Fulani herders, kidnappers, bandits, and jihadists, even the Nigerian military will not be able to hold them back. 6. Fulanis, please analyze the situation in Central African Republic, Rwanda, and Syria to see what is likely to happen when more than 300 ethnic groups rise up militarily against the Fulani and their associates who think that they can force people to convert to their religion by force in the 21st century. 7. Remember how the jihadist Seleka organization overthrew the government of Central African Republic and tried to impose Islamic rule in the country. The traditionalists and Christians rose up and counterattacked. The Seleka had to retreat to their region. There was fear that the traditionalists and Christians might massacre the Muslims. Hence, the UN and other countries had to intervene to separate the two factions. 8. Right now, there is massive protest against the jihadist government in Syria. Please, Fulanis, do not bite more than you can chew. The Fulani nationality is only one among 300 to 400 ethnic groups in Nigeria. 9. The Fulani nationality is only one among 300 to 400 ethnic groups in Nigeria. 10. It is the case that in Africa, every ethnic group has a contiguous territory which it calls its own. 11. Therefore, waging a war to impose yourselves on more than 300 ethnic groups in Nigeria is tantamount to a war of aggression. 12. Other ethnic groups have a right under international and natural law to wage a defensive war against a war of aggression. 13. Please, Fulanis, do not fight a jihad that will overwhelm you. 14. Nigeria belongs to all Nigerians. So do not think that Nigeria belongs to you, Fulani. Nigeria belongs to all Nigerian groups. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Please subscribe to the channel and listen to other captivating presentations on the Knowledge Seeker channel. Again, thank you very much.